All right, there we go. Okay, hot mic. All right, thanks everyone for joining us today for our Budget and Mortgage Forum. We aptly named this a forum because there is an opportunity for us to have questions and a dialogue. I'm looking at this as kind of my practice run for next week. So I appreciate any feedback or questions to hopefully hone what I'll be presenting next week. I also realize that we have the inquisitive minds here that might be digging a little bit further into the budget, and those are all great questions. So we can talk of maybe stuff will be more of a question for today and not need to go out to everybody, but hopefully this is a useful forum so that we can answer your questions, I don't want to say get it out of the way, but there's a lot of other stuff that we'll be talking about next week, and sometimes people's eyes gloss over with all the numbers, and we'd like to be able to present not too quickly next week, but I think this is a useful forum to discuss numbers. So on the way in, hopefully you received two handouts. One is just a quick outline of what we're going through on the slides today, and the other one is the meat and potatoes of the budget summary with my notes on it. Mike, do you have a question?
Can you tell us who you are?
Oh, hi. Sometimes I don't know who I am. My name is Alex McWhorter. I'm the current PLC treasurer, soon to be outgoing though. So this is, in some respects, my last hurrah with this part of the role, but don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. Thanks, Mike. So, yes, you haven't scared me away yet. All right, Cynthia, if you could go to the next slide. And like I said, this will be available for questions as we go forward. So if there's any questions, feel free to raise your hand and hopefully I'll be able to answer them. And there is a mic over here so that everyone can hear you. So if you have a question, go over to this mic. But before we get too far into the weeds, I'd like to open this up in prayer. Hey God, thanks for being with us here today. Please help us as we look into the numbers and the finances, as we look to do your will with your mission here. Please help us as we answer questions, as we have questions, so that we can live out the fullness of your glory. Amen. All right. So as we get started here, I'd like to look at, I think the first slide that I have is the Living Our Legacy update. So if you guys recall, some of you guys might have been here back in March of 2020 or a little bit before that. I feel like I'm a little echoey. Really hot. Is it getting better? Okay. So Living Our Legacy was a capital campaign that was started, launched in March of 2020, along with a few other things. And the campaign was slated to last for 3 years, and actually it goes just a few more months into March of 2023. So there was a couple goals that we had, and again, this is my practice run, so if there's things on these slides that don't make sense or they're hard to read, which I know they are, we'll have a few handouts available at our next meeting, and this might be one of the slides that we print out so you can have it in your hands. So the Living Our Legacy campaign, there was a group of people that got together and launched the campaign. There were a couple goals. It included our mortgage principal. It included replenishing some of our reserve funds that had been depleted when we did an HVAC renovation at the Fairfax campus. We also had goals for some capital improvements, technology, chairs, painting, some stuff in the parking lots, new signs, things like that. And it also had, let's see, hopefully a mortgage principal pay down in the future. So we had a goal of $1.6 million. We had, at the time, we're up to today, we had about pledged of $900,000, and total receipts of gifts to date is $740,000. Obviously, lots of things happen throughout the pandemic, and sometimes we have to readjust those plans that we have. So this gives a little bit of a progress bar of how those funds were used. And these were decisions that were made by mostly the original group that made the prospectus and then the PLC. So we prioritized our mortgage principal, paying down what we actually owed, and that was our owed principal for those time periods. Then we prioritized our technology upgrades, live streaming, new projectors, things like that, the lighting in the Fairfax campus as well. And we also had a 10% tithe that was going to the Synod, exterior ministries, and then to Village of Hope and interior ministries. So we split it 3 ways. So on this graph, you can see anything that's in blue is money that was spent that actually went to those things. The stuff in gray is stuff that we haven't been able to accomplish yet. And then the stuff in orange is what we plan to spend. So on our books right now, we do have about $170,000 of money that is planned to be spent for our mortgage principal this next year. I also want to step back and look at the whole pie. I've been a member here for 6-7 years and then treasurer for 2 years, and sometimes I still get confused as to where all of our money lies with different budgets and campaigns that we have going on. So the purpose of this slide is hopefully to describe the whole pie that we have. So this is definitely something that will be printed out and available in your hands for the meeting coming up next week. But this is the proposed 2023 budget. It also takes the staff costs of the lay personnel and clergy and distributes them to where that person is spending their time. So Pastor Lanny, we took his salary. Oh, sorry, not a question for you, but your ears perked up. For example, we took Pastor Lanny's time and his salary and said he spends about 15% of his time doing worship. So his 15% went into the worship piece of the pie. He spends 25% with outreach that went there. An easier way to look at it would be like Arlene, our ministry or director of outreach. I think 100% of her salary goes into that outreach piece of the pie. So what you're looking at is a loaded pie that has staff costs in it, but also the operating budget within it as well. I also pulled in the mortgage principal. Sometimes when we look at our operating budget and when we've presented in the past, the pie has a missing chunk because our mortgage principal had been carried with living our legacy or a different capital campaign. But to look holistically at the pie, I added it back in here. And then the other piece of the pie that I thought was harder to show, and I've played around a lot with the formatting of this, and it's interesting to look at, but if you notice the outside ring of the pie, those are our dedicated restricted accounts. So when you give your funds to the church or you make a gift or a donation and you specify, hey, I want this to go to neighbors in need, we have to use that money for that specific purpose. So that's a dedicated or restricted amount of cash, and it doesn't go into our general operating budget. The important thing to note about those outside wedges, that's a snapshot. That's just looking at, and I believe these numbers are from Q3 of 2022. So they're a little bit out of date. Money's been spent, money's been received since then. But that's a snapshot of, as of that date, we had $47,000 in the youth dedicated funds. We had $115,000 in the outreach funds. Each of those is split up a little bit more into different things, and we do have a handout that can describe how much is in each of those other dedicated funds, but I thought that was an important piece of the pie to also illustrate. It's also in the annual report, so I think there's a few annual reports printed in the back, and then they were also emailed out with lifelines this past week.
Outside that pie, those are expenditures or those are available funds in that dedicated?
Those are available funds in that dedicated account.
But haven't been spent inside the pie.
Sorry, the question was, are the outside ring, are those expenditures or those available funds? Those are available funds. So if there's a better way to show that without me having to explain that, I'd love to hear, because it's it's a weird piece of the pie.
Yeah, I guess my question would be, if those are dedicated funds, why would they not have been spent and then just narrow the wedge that's inside the pie?
So it's always kind of a balancing act of how much we use those dedicated accounts for. It's like if you're. Oh, the question was, if we have available funds to use, why aren't we using those and shrinking that wedge of the pie before we use up those funds, right? Which is a great question. And Cynthia and the ministry leads work with whoever administers those funds. So specifically for outreach, Arlene would be the one to look across all those different ministries. So facets, neighbors in needs, gracing spaces. So there's lots of chunks in that. And part of that piece of pie to realize now is that it does have staff costs in it. And then there are certain administrative goals that it's administrative expenditures that we would have that still need to be operated. And I'm trying to think if there's a better explanation. Cynthia might be able to explain better.
Which mic is this? Emily? Test, test. Oh, there we go. So a big reason why, so again, the dedicated accounts are just a snapshot in time. So we raise funds in anticipation of certain activities. So at any certain point in time, there may be more funds or less funds in the account because we're planning for other things. So for youth, for example, as we plan for retreats and mission trips, we'll begin fundraising and collecting registration fees. But until the activities actually happen, they sit in these designated funds. And as Alex mentioned in the annual report, there's a breakdown of how the dedicated funds are a bit more detailed in allocation. I think it's page 20? Yeah, nailed it. So it's not completely detailed. There's definitely some more subcategories potentially, but it's definitely more detailed than just a general sum. Does that help answer that question, Jim?
Thank you.
Linda?
If that, should I go to the microphone?
We could repeat
I
the
can
question.
repeat it for you.
Okay, so tracking that
Yes.
in terms of the dedicated or restricted.
Correct.
We're using those interchangeably.
Yep.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So if I were to look at December 2022, which is 430,424, not quite a $500,000.
Correct.
But significant. Then if I were to flip to page 20, dedicated account, they don't match up.
Yeah, so if you're looking at the top of the balance sheet, that's what's currently sitting in the bank accounts. But if you look at the bottom of the balance sheet, there is two line items. There's one that says dedicated accounts, and then there's one right below it that says living our legacy, and that has the $389,000 that would line up with the dedicated accounts.
So living our legacy is included.
Yes.
Yeah, technically living our legacy is a restricted
So there's not an
amount.
$80,000 plus difference between what you're showing for 430,000 and 300 and, well, maybe, I'm not doing the math.
So essentially right now, or as of 12/31, we were holding more in the checking accounts that we label as restricted, so we could cover any of the restricted costs. So it's good practice to have more money in your restricted just because there's money coming in and out every day. So I can't align those accounts every day. But at the bottom of the balance sheet where our liabilities are, you'll notice the dedicated does line up with the individual accounts on the next page.
So instead of seeing like payroll, we're not going to see a payroll line. It's going to be absorbed percentage-wise into where you allocated your time.
Just for this visual, I did that. Sorry, the question was instead of seeing payroll or costs broken out for lay personnel and clergy, are we just displaying it this way, just for this graphic only? This helped me visualize a little bit better where our time and our money is being spent. And what helped me with this is looking at, and I tried to color code it a little bit, we have a big cost for our buildings in blue. So our mortgage principal, interest, the property, like the upkeep of our buildings, that's all shown in blue. So you can see that's a little more than a third of our costs. The gray is like our administrative overhead. I like to think of those as like our general conditions. And then the yellow is worship and music ministries. So it's a little like a fifth-ish. Our outreach is maybe a little less than a fifth. And then the discipleship, so gathering, fellowship, youth, and in education is about a third. So it was interesting to me because previously when we've looked at the budgets, when they've had just a big staff cost, it was hard to tell like where are we actually spending our money. But as we look in the budget that we'll actually look at in just a second here, it does have those costs broken out.
It's on page 2 of the one-page handout.
Yes. All right, I'm going to continue on. Oh, yes.
Could you remind everybody what the church year is? It's 31 March to 31 March.
It is not. So the question was talking about what the calendar year is for the church. So our fiscal year for the church is the calendar year. It has not changed. So
Legacy goes to the 31st of March.
yes, so the capital campaign has operated on a different timeline from March to March. I can't answer why that is the case. And also in the past, our generally our generosity campaigns, just the general campaign for our operating budget, has operated on a almost fiscal calendar year, sometimes February, March. There's clearly a lot of work that goes into reconciling end-of-year financial documents for tax purposes. So Cynthia and our accountant Jerry have been doing a lot of work just for financial end-of-year things and also preparing for this presentation. I would love, and this might be a recommendation, I was not able to accomplish this in my time as treasurer. I would love for us to shift that fiscal year to a not calendar year. We'll see if that's able to be achieved in the future. Good luck to the next PLC to maybe make that happen. Yes, no, and it would make a lot of sense. Also, it doesn't necessarily make sense to me why, and this is just how we've operated, but right now we're voting on, or next week we will be voting on our 2023 budget. We're already several weeks into 2023, so maybe in the future it looks like we vote on the budget sometime in November or December. There's obviously lots of things happening around that time, but it might be prudent to vote on a budget before we get into that fiscal year.
So just one other comment. Sorry, I'm standing in the back because I'm running slides and it's hard to loop around every time. So this coming year, as we launch this campaign, we're going to finish out this campaign until March 31st of 2023. But this upcoming campaign will only go to the end of the year. So it will go to December 31st because it is incredibly confusing for everybody involved, including myself, when we're running campaigns and pledges off of the calendar and fiscal. So we're getting us back onto it this upcoming year, and it's definitely been something we've been talking about. So this is the year we're going to accomplish that.
Yay. All right, I'm going to start to go through the 2023 proposed budget. So this is something that you do have in your hands. If you didn't get a handout on your way in, I don't know if there's more available. There's more. Okay, raise your hand if you didn't get one, and we'll get one to you. So this has a couple things, and I'll dance around while people are getting them in their hands. I tried to give you a lot of information on this without giving too much, but what is also available is this is the summary version of our budget. We also have a detailed version that breaks out these values into more subcategories. So that's available to be sent out, or I do have slides on it. I don't know if we want to look at them, but it ends up being a lot to look at. So if we're reading from left to right, we have the name of the account on the left, the proposed budget for 2023. We also have the previous year's budget, and then we have the difference between those two to see where things have shifted around. And then we also have the actuals for 2022 for a comparison. I didn't add in a difference column between those two because we started getting column happy. And I also have some notes on what actually goes into that budget, where that money is being spent, any notes on what happened this past year maybe, and then also if that specific budget line is supported by a dedicated account that has funds available for it.
Realizing
Ken.
this is getting streamed, and that's really small writing.
Yes.
Is this two-page handout, was that put as part of Lifelines this week? Or can it go out for the next Lifelines?
So the information that's on the sheet was not included in Lifelines, but the budget and the numbers are included in the annual report and in Lifelines.
Yes.
The reason I'm specifically thinking is Prep Packs, I don't know if they've got copies, hard copies of this, so it may be helpful to send
Yes.
this handout out.
Noted. Yes.
What I'm looking at on the handout doesn't include the 2022 actuals.
It does not because I printed them at work on Friday, so apologies for that. So we will make this available and we can print out some more things or you can squint. So a couple notes on, and I think I added them, let's see. Just a little bit of background on how the budget is prepared, and just some things to consider is that the budget is prepared mostly by Cynthia with the support of all the staff that end up administering those funds or working with those funds as it kind of disseminates out into the various ministries that we have here. So she works with those staff members to make a plan, to look at how much they've spent in that current year, what they plan to do in the future, and then it goes to the PLC for comment. We had several meetings where we hashed out anything moving around, where we had questions, and then it went to the PLC for a vote. We have upvoted this budget, and now it's going out to you all. I also want to emphasize that the budget is a plan. It's not, I'm used to contracting world as a general contractor in construction where I have my contract budget and that's what I have to stick to. And that's what I'm obligated to bill to whoever, and then my subcontractors can bill that to me. This is a little bit different here where we're working with our budget plan. And as you know, a couple things happened this past year where we didn't expect them to happen. So I just want to emphasize that this is our plan going forward and things happen. So we used historical data to look at what we expect our income to be. So this first slide is just our income. We have a $1.47 million income that we're projecting, and this is the general offerings from our congregation. I put in a little bit about our notes on how much we've adjusted over the years, and then where other things lie. So we've transitioned from the push pay giving platform to Planning Center. So if you haven't shifted your giving, the push pay system was shut down. So if you had automatic giving set up on that, it is no longer coming out of wherever you had designated for it to come out. And if you haven't shifted to Planning Center yet, I invite you to do that. Because we didn't automatically migrate anything. We can't do that on your end, but we were able to shut down the old system. I'm trying to think if I have any more specific things here. So the non-offering related income is made up of a couple different things. That's our building use, when outside groups come and use our buildings and they pay either a cleaning fee or just money to rent out our space. In the past, Clifton campus was used by Loving Hill. Unfortunately, they did stop using the space this past year. I think in September, I don't believe they're operating any longer. So that's part of the reason why you've seen a decrease from the 2022 budget to this year's budget is we don't have a contract with them any longer as they've shut down. That number also includes any donations from our preschools. So I believe this year and next year, we've received $11,000 from the Fairfax campus, and then we're really excited as the Clifton campus here. I I believe this past year was one of the first years that they've been cash positive enough to be able to donate, I think, $500 to the general operating funds. That number also includes our cell tower use. So if you don't know, the Fairfax campus has the steeple is used as a cell tower. So we have 2 contracts with cell providers that pay us rent, and then they've modified those steeples to use cell coverage. Unfortunately, we don't get free internet out of that, but that is another source that goes into that budget line item. All right, Cynthia, if you could project to the next slide. So I think I have 2 or 3 slides here that detail our expenditures now. And obviously, there's a lot of information that goes up here, but this is a reminder that these are our operating budgets, and I've tried to highlight in each one of these where they are supported by specific dedicated funds. So you'll notice that the outreach fund, which has a budget of $51,000 this coming year, that is also supported by the dedicated funds. And I know there's usually a lot of questions about what goes into each of these, so I've tried to list it out with a brief description of what goes into them. And I know it's also in small print on your handouts, so if there's any questions, please let me know. Another note is any of our contracts or large contracts that we have for services like our custodial services or our communications services, those are on contracts that usually range, they're annual contracts, but we do have a policy in place that those contracts get reviewed every 3 to 5 years. And we're, with I think both of those that I mentioned just now, we're getting close to that 4 or 5 year period. So that's something that the HR committee will be looking at to elicit outside proposals for potential comparison to what we have and to potentially sign new contracts. Are there any questions about this chunk of items? Most of our actuals for this past year were pretty close to being in line with where the budget was, with what our plan was, with a couple exceptions, one of which is Cynthia, it's in the music ministries, correct? So the music ministries, half of the story is on this slide and half the story is on the next slide. You'll notice that as Craig pointed out, it's not printed on your handout here, but the music ministries was over budget by about $5,000 this year, and that is offset by another item below. So as we had a couple vacancies in staff positions with the music ministry this past year, and we had a gap before Robert came to join us, we were contracting out those positions. So that money was spent or budgeted here. And then if you look in the lay personnel line below, further down the sheet, the money that would have been spent on that staff position shows as a savings on that line. If you could go to the next slide. So we come down, this slide does show the totals that we're working with. So our budget this year, we're getting close. We worked it into a $230 net positive for what the plan is. So we're close to using everything that we've got. And you'll also see that our actuals, which are better shown probably in that annual report on page 19, shows that or 18 and 19, shows that our net income for this past year, 2022, was negative $45,000. So I think a video that went out October, November sometime, we were projecting about a $50,000 deficit. At the time, there's lots of curves and giving patterns that we're trying to look at. And we know that December is usually a big giving period when we have lots of visitors coming in or people are looking at their end of year finances and able to give a larger gift. So we were very excited that as projected, our December giving was a lot higher than the previous months that we had been looking at. So something that I do want to look at here is most of our expenditures this past year were either right at or below what we had planned to spend. So there's not too much adjusting that's going on between the 2022 budget and the 2023 budget. We do have, I tried to put in some information about staff personnel in those two lines. So we have staff covered in the clergy lines and the lay personnel lines. We have about 11.1 full-time equivalent people that work here at the church. If you go to our website, you can see there's, maybe 18 individuals, 19, 20. That does include the preschool directors, but it does not include their staff and their teachers. If it did, that number would grow quite a bit. And we don't show their costs in this budget line item. So the preschool directors and their costs are not shown in these numbers.
Another important thing to note in your annual report, I think it might be page 3 or 4, or somewhere towards the front, we have a breakdown of the organizational chart, and we've highlighted the full-time and part-time staff members and sort of where they fall in the categories. So if you'd like to look at that a little bit more detailed, you're welcome to do that there.
So something to note about our staff with the clergy line is we are following the Synod guidelines for staff costs. So the Synod, the DC Metro Synod, and all the larger ELCA church, but it's specific to each synod and area, does put out a guideline and kind of a working spreadsheet of how to calculate a salary range. So that salary range takes into account the median housing cost for the area. We get a little tricky with ours being spread over a couple zip codes, but it's kind of consistent between here and Fairfax. It takes into account years of service, level of education, the number of people at your specific church and how many people worship there. So the tool that's given to us is kind of a broad tool that can be used for a church that has 20 worshiping members that is out in rural Virginia, or it also needs to work for us. So if you plug in numbers to that, if you say, hey, we have a pastor that's fresh out of seminary, they don't have any experience yet, and they just have their Master's of Divinity, and they're worshiping at, or they're going to be contracted to work here. I believe the number it spits out for their base salary is $74,000 on the low end. If you go the opposite way, and you say we have somebody coming in with, I think it caps out at 5 to 10 years of experience, they have their doctorate in divinity, and all the other parameters are similar, they could be making up to $150,000 on their base salary. And so those guidelines are available if you want to look at them on the Synod website. I've got it plugged into an Excel spreadsheet, that way I can play with numbers pretty quickly, but I thought that was relevant information to give to you all. And then also with our lay personnel, we do have a couple people that work at hourly rates, and those range from about $16 an hour to I think $25 an hour for those hourly positions. And then we have a couple other things that are broken out between continuing education that's recommended by the Synod, that we budget for costs for the pastors and the clergy to continue their education, to stay up to date with things that are happening. I'm trying to think if there's anything else specifically to run over here. If you're looking at something like the grounds, last year we did have an overrun in our grounds line. We got hit with a couple snowstorms, if you recall, in January, February, and we ran through our budget of snowplows very quickly. So Cynthia's adjusted that this year to hopefully, knock on wood, be able to either cover that or to hopefully we don't have as bad as snowstorms. Although I got a text from my parents in Ohio this morning and they had a lot of snow, so that might be coming our way. Yes.
Back to the audit.
Yes.
Can you tell us when the last time we had an external audit? I know that's been brought up before. It might be brought up in the congregational meeting, so
Yep.
maybe that's something you can reference, because I think a year or 2 years ago, we didn't have money to do that. And ELCA suggests every 3 to 5 years, so just a question.
Yep, so the question was about an audit, when the last time an external audit was conducted, and then noting some of the notes that are in here about the ELCA recommending an external audit or some type of audit every 3 to 5 years. So I don't have, let's see, an external audit has been done for quite a number of years. Probably longer than it should be for an external audit. But something to note is that there's different levels of an audit ranging in cost. We could do an external audit where they look at everything but the kitchen sink or including the kitchen sink. And those are pretty costly. They could be up to $15,000, $30,000. And then there's also a level where maybe they would just look at our books, because when we say an audit, they would be looking at all of our assets, like counting all the chairs, because that's an asset that we have, all of our procedures. We could drop down to maybe doing something that's like a smaller external audit that's more like $3,000 to $4,000, which Cynthia, I think last week, started reaching out to vendors to get quotes for. So it's in the works. But something to also look at is we have done annually an internal audit. So it's not like our books aren't being looked at. And there's an audit committee that's voted and presented as a slate from our Constitution. So the audit committee, there's a report from the 2020 audit. What page?
21.
Page 21 is our 2020 audit that was conducted a while back. And then the audit committee, the next audit committee did look at the books in November of this past year, and they're working on that report as well.
For the 2021 year. One other thing to note in the dedicated accounts, we have been setting aside funds for an audit. So I believe there's about $15,000 in dedicated accounts to save for an external full audit. So it is something that we're trying to work towards and make sure that we have the funds to accomplish that when we're ready to do so.
Yes.
Alex, as part of the audit committee, I know what we've done, but you might want to explain to people that there was not just 3 of us, a group of us in that room, and what are the things that we did to kind of test the books. That might be helpful to just kind of explain some of that.
Yep, so the audit committee is generally made up of 2 to 3 people, and they are generally looking at the books from the previous year, because those have been essentially closed out or they're complete to look at. And they meet on a given weekend. I think we met on October of 2021 on a nice Saturday morning, and we looked at the books. So Cynthia and Jerry were ready to present anything that we really asked for that fiscal year. So we did spot checks on 7.
So I can actually provide you all the procedures of exactly what we currently are using. It's probably really too detailed to go in this space, but they evaluate expenses as well as income, make sure that things are allocated correctly, verify reconciliations to dedicated and checking and banking accounts. So it's pretty comprehensive, and it essentially sets us up for when we do an external one so that the process is essentially seamless. It'll be pretty much the same. Greg Fletcher is actually one of the people who has been serving on our audit team, and he is, trust me, very detail-oriented when it comes to that stuff.
Yes. So generally what that looked like is us giving, I think, 7 or 8 dates and time periods to look at from that fiscal period, and then Cynthia and Jerry pulling all those records, us spot checking them of did everything add up, did the offerings line up with what was actually deposited in the bank, did the hours that were on someone's timesheet match up with their paycheck, looking at all the nitty-gritty fun stuff. We had a good time, right?
Oh, wouldn't call it a good time.
Okay. I had a good time.
I also want to note that it wasn't in October. It was September 18th because it was my birthday.
Oh,
and I
yes.
spent my birthday doing the audit, so.
Michelle.
I have 2 questions, but one is with regard to the late personnel expense for 2022 actual, which is about $400,000, and it's up by about 30% into the 23 Because it's a large increase overall, but I have to imagine the headcount has changed, the need has changed.
Yep, headcount has changed, and Cynthia might rely on you for our staffing breakdown or where we're adjusting people.
It isn't a huge shift necessarily in the staffing model. Part of it is actually because we're down one clergy member, so those expenses transferred really to the lay expenses. So if you look, the clergy is down about 57, the lay is up 55. That's the balance. It's kind of the teeter-totter.
We had also, in the 2022 budget, we had planned to have add in another staff member because, man, I would have to start to go back and look at when we had Pastor Julia here and Pastor Mike and Pastor Bruce. So we're down a couple people right now, and in going into 2022, we had planned to hire more, and some of those things weren't realized this past year.
But we anticipated in 23.
Anticipated in 2023, and right now we're, if you know anybody, we're looking for a facilities manager. So that is an open, on an Indeed, I think is where we've posted the job. So that's something that's budgeted for, but not filled yet.
And then my other question related to envelope offerings. I know the single page does budget to budget, but probably from that perspective, more interesting to see actual to budget, right? What we actually do in 22.
Yep.
And I was just wondering, it's the projected budget's like 12% growth on our actuals for 22. How did we do in 22? Do you have any sense or remember what growth we expected in 22? Like how much did we increase from 21 to 22? Was there additional giving? I just worry that everything drives us revenue, right?
Correct.
Offering, so it's great that we've got 1.6 in revenue, but if we don't do it right, the expenses.
Yep.
So I was just wondering, if we have this 12% growth, did we have an increase in revenue over the last year?
So the question was from, I'll try to summarize, I think. So the question was, and Cynthia, could you go back a couple slides to show the income side? So from looking at the comparison of the actuals from 2022 and the budget of last year and then this budget this year, comparing the actual of 1.3 received to the 1.4 that we've budgeted for next year. That's about a 12% growth. I'm relying on you for your numbers. 12.6% increase. $165,000 in additional giving that we've projected increased from the actuals received this past year. Cynthia, do you have the numbers of where we had projected from last year if we've had an increased giving?
No.
No.
That's not a number I have in my head right now this morning. What I can tell you is that when we were looking at the 2022 budget, the initial offering that I had proposed was 1.47, so it matches this year. We had put in place an $87,000 challenge additional offering, and that was to help pay for an additional clergy member. That 1.47 is what we had been receiving basically during the pandemic. So during 19, 20, and 21, that was the average that we had received in offering. So trying to do our best to not overshoot, but also not undershoot.
But 19, 20, 21 average 147?
Yeah.
Okay. So 22 being the down year significant. Okay.
Yep.
That's helpful.
Cynthia, can you jot down a note and we'll maybe give some better numbers
I
on
think
this?
that's a great answer to that question if you get it, because otherwise it looks very inconsistent to say we're going to grow by 13% the workforce.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's a huge skew this year, again, because this budget is produced, I start this, in August and September, so we're just still projecting and not sure what we anticipate at year end in some ways. So yeah, it's definitely something to keep in mind and consider.
The other thing that I'd like to offer up is some of our renewed generosity team initiatives. So Mike Brondos has stepped up and is doing a lot of work with the generosity team that as I step down from the PLC, I'm gonna put a lot of effort into what he's working on and the campaigns, the general campaign that we have and the capital campaigns that'll be going on. And I've got a lot of ideas moving forward. But that's a great question. Yes, Mike.
Does this in anywhere here account for in-kind contributions, like when the preschools do improvements that benefit the whole congregation?
So the question was, does this budget take into account any in-kind services or improvements from various members or our affiliate organizations? And it does not. But that's a great question, and if you're looking in the annual report, and I do have slides on the preschool's finances and budgets, they've noted some of those improvements that they've paid for or provided to the congregation. So I believe it's page 20, 21, it's towards the back. Jeff.
Two questions on the previous, the one we were on right before going back.
Yes.
The parsonage, is it current?
On the bottom. You might just be muted.
Hello?
Yes.
Is the parsonage currently occupied? And also, I noticed the expenses for that went up by quite a bit. What are we spending on that?
Yes. So I guess I don't have to repeat the question. The parsonage is currently occupied and rented at a fair market value. And the budgets, Cynthia, if you could click to get to the parsonage number. So let's see, if we're comparing the money that we had budgeted last year to what the actuals were, we did not spend about $5,000 that was budgeted. We foresee a lot of repairs that are needed, specifically to the roof, the soffits, a couple other of the appliances that our tenants have been pretty patient with, or we're maybe hopeful that a hailstorm gives us an excuse to use insurance on our roof that probably needs to be replaced. But then we have to plow our lots, so it's a give and a take. Did that answer your question? Great. I wish we could just vote on the budget right now. I guess if we go to the next slide, I do have lots of slides for the detailed budget. So when I say that there's more information available, if you want to know how much we actually have projected for the cell tower use or the building use, this information is available and we can send it out if you really want to dig into the numbers. I shy away from blasting everybody with this because I can see people's eyes gloss over. It's a lot to digest.
But I love going over it, so if you want to come hang out with me any day, we'll do it.
Yes.
No problem.
So if you have questions about that within the next week, Cynthia and or myself will make ourselves available. I'm generally more available in the evenings after work hours. And I think I've got a relatively open week this week, so I'm happy to field emails or jump on a call to look at things. The other thing that I think is important to look at is just our balance sheet. So the snapshot of our finances from December 31st of 21 to just a few weeks ago on December 31st of 22. So you can see that this is where some of the restricted funds and like the actual bank accounts lie. So if we're looking at the difference between the two, we're about $160,000 less in our bank accounts. So that's money that we spent mostly out of the dedicated accounts for the Living Our Legacy, so money that we spent on our mortgage principal going forward. And also there's about the third to last line, the net income line, so that's where we hold the liability of where we are cash flow wise. So at the end of last year, we were up $35,000, and then it's about a $70,000 swing to get down to what we just finished the year at negative $45,000. So that's generally where the 160, 170 swing comes from last year to this year. I think that, yeah, more detail. Did I just slide that random slide in there in the wrong spot? Great, okay. More information, this is what's in the annual report for the preschools that we have. So as I mentioned previously, each preschool's budgets are held separately, but they do fall under our 501c3. So I know there's lots of information up here, but the annual report is probably the better spot to look at this without a magnifying glass. And this is where we have detailed out where some of the improvements that have been done to our general campuses is detailed out. So if you're looking down at the bottom left area, the playground repairs, maintenance to both the church and the preschool's general facilities was funded by the Fairfax campus by about $13,000. And then you can also see, let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else to highlight here. So this is their budget for the past fiscal year and their budget going forward, and then also their balance sheet. And there's been a lot of really great improvements between the two preschools and them working together to have similar staff cost rates. I don't want to say they're like interchangeable, but they've definitely been working together to closely collaborate. And then as we look at the Clifton sheets, Clifton tuition did start to raise. It was pretty low for the area and the services that were being provided here over the past few years, so that's started to come up to more market value, which has resulted in them being able to donate about $500 to the church here. But they also similarly had about $5,000 of repairs and maintenance costs that they did to the playgrounds here, so that's I think worth noting. And
Alex, I probably want to just mention, plan for this year is
yes.
the access control security system for both campuses.
Yep, so thank you, Julie, for pointing out that we plan to install better access control for both campuses. So that's putting locks on each door that are monitored and able to be, I believe we're going with a key card system. We're still evaluating what the system will look like, but we're going away from analog physical keys that can be handed out and we can't really tell who is in the building at what time. So it's an added, definitely there's a lot of benefit for the preschools with their safety and security of knowing who has access to the building when. Hopefully we'll be able to program, certain people should be able to have access during these hours. But it also is going to be a big improvement for the campuses at large, for the rest of us as well. So that's something that the preschools both are going to be paying for that the larger church will benefit from. Are there any other questions before I hand it over to Doug and he'll talk about mortgage stuff? Again, it'll be available this week. Email the PLC email or Cynthia and we'll get in contact. Can I have that? Thank you.
Am I on? Yes, I am. Okay. Hi, I'm Doug Vegan. This is my wife, Melissa. We've been members for 40 years here. And I spent more than one time being on the PLC as treasurer and president and other types of stuff and on every building committee. So that's why I'm up here. But before I go on, I want to say thanks to Alex and the work of the PLC on this budget. I've been through it many times before, and it's not something that they do lightly. I mean, there's hours and days and hours agonizing over everything, and it's so hard to do. And thank you for all your work, Alex, and being treasurer the last couple of years. So thank you very much. He mentioned something in the middle of his presentation about the cell phone towers. And you sometimes have to tell stories here that are uplifting. So I don't know how many people here know the story of the cell tower and what happened to it. Because when we leased it, they wanted to put more equipment in it than the size of our steeple would allow. So whoever has the lease up there, Verizon or something, said, well, we'll just make a bigger steeple for you, at our cost and our expense, and we'll take down the steeple, and no harm, no foul. And they signed a liability waiver, they take care of everything. So our previous administrator was just reading a church magazine, and there happened to be, right around the time the steeple was coming down, a small church either in Tennessee or Kentucky that was advertising for a steeple. I mean, how does that happen? And so he calls the church up and says, our steeple's coming down in 3 days, and if you have a flatbed truck laying here, the contractor will put it on there. Otherwise, they're hauling it to the dump. Well, the guy who was the church administrator, I think if I got the story right, had a trucking company. And they literally came up here and they put the steeple on there and they drove it back and they had a dedication. Is that cool? See? God will take care of us here. It's all going to work out. So keep that in the back of your mind, okay? So first slide. I know you all been sitting here a long time, so I will try to go fast, but I will try to cover all the information, ask all questions. So the mortgage. If you look in your budget, it's $4.6 million. It's a lot of money, but we're going to figure this out. So mortgage status objective, provide an updated information on the status of mortgage, focusing on critical mortgage issues, answer questions, solicit advice. Okay, got through that. Next. Mortgage, as we all know, is more than sticks or bricks. All the services that we do that go on here, services and outreach, all the things that we do happen inside, a lot of times, inside these sticks and bricks. So while it's not fun to give money to make a mortgage payment, you got to think that every of those dollars is helping these services and schools and other ministries happen. So we need to keep that in mind when we talk about solving our mortgage problem. Next. So, brief history. Again, some people here are new, some people are not, so we kind of have to go back. If you go back to the beginning of 55 years ago, the original Fairfax campus was called the 7-Eleven on the Hill, because the sanctuary and the preschool that was there, that part wasn't built till like 1991. And there were like 3 building programs before that. So it was literally the 7-Eleven on the hill when you drove by it. No steeple, just basically where the fellowship hall is. And that was both the fellowship hall and the sanctuary and preschool and everything. And it grew over time. And then we built the sanctuary and preschool area. In 1991, I believe it was dedicated. I could be off by a year or 2 here, but that's not important. We had a building program, and we raised money, and we paid off some of the debts we had, and we built it. And then we grew to about, I think, around 600 people worshiping on a weekend in Fairfax, 4 services a weekend, Saturday night, Sunday night, and 2 on Saturday and Sunday. And then in Clifton, Holy Spirit was what, averaging 75 to 100? Is that right about that? At Centerville High School. And when we came together to decide to build this church, the thought was that Fairfax would kind of like stay steady, because it was an older part of Fairfax County, but we didn't see things going downhill. So if they were kind of like going steady, and we open this up, and attendance goes this way, then we'd probably meet that $2.2 million budget that we had planned for 2020. Well, things happen, like recessions and COVID and things like that. So we're not hitting the goals that we expected to hit. And we took a mortgage out that reflected that plan. So now things have changed, and we just have to deal with it. Next. So we built the Clifton campus, and we went to Thrivent. Well, first of all, we had a loan from Mission Investment Fund that was a construction loan. You draw the money down as you pay your contractors to build it. And then we needed to go get a long-term loan. Thrivent had the best deal. 20 years, 4.375%, $38,000 a month. No problem, because we're going to grow. Everything will be fine. And then, of course, stuff happens. So we went back to Thrivent in 2019, and they, by the way, If you're not a Thrivent member, you should be one because they've been very, very good to us. So we went back to them, we said, look, lots of stuff have happened. And they said, okay, we'll reduce your principal portion of your payment, and your mortgage payment goes from 38 to 27, and that's going to save us a lot of money. And then the difference between that, the $1.2 million you see up there, we'll just tack that onto the end of your mortgage. So you're going to have a balloon payment. Instead of like your house where you pay it over 30 years and the last payment is zero, when we made our last payment in July of 33, we'd still owe them $1.2 million. And we were like, no problem, because we can raise $1.2 million and pay it off, or we've had to refinance at that point, not a problem. In exchange for that, though, our loan converted from a fixed rate of 4.375% to an adjustable rate mortgage. So in February of 24, a year from now, our interest rate changes. At this point in time, it's going to go up. But our principal payment will stay at $38,464. They were nice about that. But the problem there is that if there's more interest, we're not paying it, it's going to add to that $1.211 million basically 10 years from now. So we had, in exchange for this, we had our living legacy. So for the last 3 years, Living Our Legacy has been paying the principal portion of our mortgage payment of $27,000 a month. The operating account has been covering the interest. So if you go back to your plan, the budget you just saw, you'll see about 196,000. Sorry, I've got tons and tons of numbers in my head, so if I'm off a little bit, bear with me and forgive me. But about $196,000 of interest is what shows up in the operating account, and the rest has been covering from Living Our Legacy, which is ending right now. There's enough money in Living Our Legacy to continue to make our principal portion of our mortgage payment through 2023, maybe a little bit into 24. So we sat down, Pastor Lenny put together the Resource Advisory Team, RATS. And I've asked them now twice to come up with a better name, but that's who we are. So we sat down in February because we're looking at this, oh my goodness gracious, we got this big mortgage, it's $4.6 million as of the end of the year. Our mortgage payment's going back up again. What are we going to do? Oh my gosh, the world's ending. We decided to communicate with everybody. We had the open forum back in March, letting everybody know what was going on. I'm sorry, November. And we pointed out what was going on. We asked for ideas. We got lots of ideas. Can we have member notes? Can we refinance? And we're going to get to that here in a second. So the group got together because you look at $4.6 million and you're like, what are we going to do? And you can just kind of panic and go, this is too much. And as I used to tell our kids, you get a big problem. How do you face it? It's like an elephant, one bite at a time. So we sat down with our calculators and our pens and said, let's attack this. How are we going to do this? Next slide. Okay, so kind of some facts. The operating budget is $196,000 a year. The principal owned through February of 2024 is about $265,000, which will be paid through Living Our Legacy. So we need about $265,000 a year going forward to cover our mortgage payments, which is about what we've done in the last capital campaign. So you have another capital campaign, and we can make those payments over the next couple of years. Well, okay, what does that do to us? What's the end game here? So for the next slide, I think I have it on here. So that's great. We can make mortgage payments for the next couple of years. How do we solve this problem? So we took all the ideas. Let's just throw everything on the table. Let's see what sticks. So here are where we are. We got the original loan up there. We got the relief plan from Thrivent. Where we are today, $4,573,000. And in March of 24, it'll be $4.398 million. So that's kind of where we are today. I don't think I need to get into all this. This is just kind of the history. I've kind of given you this. So if I go to the next slide. So these are the folks that are on the Mortgage Resource Advisory Team, my fellow rats. Bruce Jennings, Mike McGlanagan, Alex McWhitter, John Richter, Doug Vegan, Janice Yemba, Cynthia Saunders, and Pastor Lanny. Okay? Moving on. Here's all these ideas that we had. And we're like, okay, renegotiate a Thrivent loan, refinance with a new lender, member notes and loans, rent one campus, sell a parsonage, and a capital campaign. So can we put any of these together? And we looked at each one of them. What are the pros and what are the cons? And we said, let's kind of figure out an end game. So renegotiate a Thrivent loan. Well, if you owe $4.6 million, and I've talked to Thrivent, their interest rate now is in the high fives. If you take out a calculator or you go to the internet and do one of those mortgage calculators, well, we're going to be above the $166,000. That $196,000 a year that we've been paying with our operating budget is about $16,500 a month that we can afford. So if we want to go refinance the entire $4.6 million, we're kind of in the same bucket we have Thrivent right now. So that doesn't seem to me to make sense. Refinance with a new lender. Well, I'm a banker. I make loans like this. Same thing. The rates are high. So that's kind of interesting. After this slide was made, Lanny gets a phone call from Mission Investment Fund. I don't know why he called you up, but he called you up. And they were chatting, and the guy was saying, hey, we can give you a 25-year loan at 5.5%. Doesn't quite get us where we want to be. Same type of thing. It's better than what I thought the rates would be, but it tells me that there's money out there for a 25-year mortgage. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So member notes, great idea. I think Linda had this idea. We collect notes, not pledges. No, wasn't you? Okay. Okay, I take that back. So the idea was everybody lend money to the church as opposed to just giving money towards a pledge program. So we're like, great, let's try that. It's been done before. When we built the Fairfax campus, there were outstanding member notes still due. I don't remember how much, but we paid those off before we started drawing on our construction loan for Fairfax. So we can do it. So we sat down and we said, okay, what have we been raising over the last 4 or 5 campaigns going back 30 years? Anywhere from 900 to about $1.2 million. Are we going to be able to raise $4.6 million in member notes? Seems a little bit aggressive. Okay, can we get a new mortgage out and get a smaller mortgage and some member notes? There's an idea. Okay, if we do that, we only have $166,000 in our operating budget to cover it without more pledge programs. So we'd have to have a pledge program to pay off the member notes. And that seemed a little bit uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable, it's doable, but maybe not our top choice. So, then we go down to here, do we want to rent a campus? Well, nobody wants to rent a campus. Which campus are you going to rent? And let's say you rent Fairfax. If somebody wanted to rent it, let's say it's another church, well, they're going to want probably the upstairs and the downstairs. And we don't want to close that preschool. We don't want to rent this one. We just built it 10 years ago. That doesn't sound like something we want to do. And by the way, we don't need to. Sell a campus. That was brought up before. But if you're going to have a hard time deciding which one to rent, try to figure out which one you're going to sell. The good news is we don't need to worry about it. But I just want to let you know we thought about everything. So sell the parsonage and a capital campaign. As I said, I've been on PLC in different manners going back to the early 90s. And every PLC that I've been on, selling the parsonage has come up. And some people say we don't need it. Other people are saying we've used it for so many things. We've had associate pastors stay there. We've had interns stay there. We've had the youth group go and have meetings and play ping pong in the basement. We could put a refugee family there. Once you sell that, we obviously can't afford to buy a new one. So people are like, don't sell it. But there's a lot of people out there saying, you know what, its usefulness and time has gone because we haven't had a pastor in the last 20 years, a senior pastor that wants to stay there. They all want their own home and build up their own equity. So there are logical reasons on both sides to sell it and not sell it. So putting that in your hat there, in a capital campaign. So flip the slide here. So here's an idea, after going through all that the resource advisory team kind of came up with. First thing is, we know we can raise about $300,000 a year in pledges. We've done it before for 30 years. We can do it again. If you sell the parsonage for about $611,000, that's just a number I kind of went on, what is it, Redfin or whatever else, and just looked it up and took away 6% sales cost, and that could be 600, could be 620, it doesn't really matter. And then the existing funds on hand for principal, so if we take the $1.2 million and the $600,000 and we owe 4.6 now, we're down to about $2.56 million. And that keeps both campuses open. And oh, by the way, you don't have to sell the parsonage first. You could sell the parsonage 3 years from now if you wanted to follow this plan. That gives you the flexibility of 3 years from now, new pastor, COVID's over, more people coming to church, then we may not have to sell the preschool. So, parsonage, excuse me. Can't sell a preschool, a parsonage. My wife has been living with this for 40 years. She just rolls her eyes when I get things mixed up. Sorry, honey. So we don't have to sell the parsonage now. We could kind of kick that can down the road. And maybe we end up raising $1.8 million over 4 years. You just don't know. So this would allow both campuses to keep going, which is what we all want. Next slide. And so, this came back up again. Where's this? Is this a new slide? Oh, the last column. Okay, so if you had a campaign that collected $300,000 and you got it down to $2.5 million, if you had an interest rate between 5 and 6% and a mortgage term of 25 years, the principal and interest payment is $16,333 a month or $196,000 a year. So, one more pledge program. At the end, you may or may not sell the parsonage. We could get the mortgage down to $2.5 million, refinance it in the 5 to 6% range. It all depends on if it's a 5% rate at 20 years or a 6% rate at 25 years. That's all we don't know. But I've run it a couple different ways. And Mission Investment Fund was 25 years, 5.5%, 5-year ARM. So we can do this. This is not impossible. When I first sat down with the resource committee, I was like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And the more I ran the numbers, and the more I realized, taking this a bite at a time, this is something we can handle. We've done it in the past, and I see no reason to be worried, honestly. So the only downside to this is that in 4 years, we have a $2.5 million mortgage for another 25 years. That's not comfortable, but at least we're living within our giving means. And if we wanted to, we could have a pledge program in the future and pay it off. My wish and prayer is that we get to 4 years from now and everybody says, you know what? Let's just do it again and pay it off. But we'll cross that bridge in 4 years. So that's kind of the plan that the resource group would like everybody to think about. It's the plan that the next renewing our, what is the campaign called? Renewing Our Legacy is going to look at. So we have the money to make the mortgage payment, the principal payment, for another year. So we're going to have the campaign this year to start paying 24. So we're kind of getting, we're collecting and then spending the money as we go, which makes a lot of sense. So no one's asking for pledges today. If somebody wants to be a lead donor, either anonymous or stand up here and do that, somebody says, you know what, I will match the first $100,000 with a $100,000 check. or whatever you want to do, that would be wonderful. But the one thing that I always remember about the 7-Eleven on Hill, and there are some people here that were here then, and there are some people that are new. There are many, many, many people who pledged money to build the first edition of the 7-Eleven on the Hill, and the second one, and the third one, and the big edition in 1991, and to build this church. And many of those people are retired or moved or whatever, but they gave to the church for future generations. This is our challenge. It's a very easy challenge. We just do it again, and we don't think about, oh, this is some money today. We think about what's going to go on within these walls and the Fairfax walls for future generations. I think I caught what I wanted to say. The last point. Resolving this issue should be an attractive feature to a pastoral candidate. Sorry I missed that. Thank you very much. When we go and the call committee goes out to search for a pastor, it would be so beneficial for that person to be able to see that this congregation faced the elephant head on, and that we're making plans with or without. We're not waiting for somebody to lead us somewhere. We're on a path, and we just need a spiritual advisor to help us carry into the next steps. So with that, does anybody have any questions? I know I throw a lot of stuff at you, but I was trying to talk fast because I know it's been a long morning. Yes, ma'am?
Could you flip back to the last?
Flip that one?
Okay,
Yeah, one.
If we gave, and the idea I had was selling the parsonage, and I know there's controversy, but if we looked at that option and went to Thriven and said, we're willing to sell that, a major asset, do you think they would be willing to negotiate on the interest rate instead of having it as a variable rate? If they saw a big chunk of money coming in, do you think they would revert back, or could it be renegotiated for a steady rate, fixed rate?
Good question, Linda. The answer is no. I've already talked to Thriven. Okay, I've been talking to Thriven for years now. What I failed to tell everybody is that when we went to get the mortgage to build this church and get the mortgage from Thriven, the collateral for that loan is this building, the Fairfax campus, and the parsonage, okay? Because we were selling the lender on our dreams of growth. And being a banker, it's like, yeah, but give me something now, okay? And I can give it back when things are better. Well, things aren't better. So I went back to Thrivent sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I'm like, hey, it's me again. Can you help us out? And the answer was, we have. We helped you out with this plan, and Cynthia, during COVID, didn't they give us relief for 3 months payments? Didn't Thrivent give us 3 months relief?
So as part of their COVID relief plan, most lenders provided 3 months of payment deferral, so we did take advantage of that in 2020.
So those was that the 16,000 or the whole 27,000? So those 3 months at 27,000 got pushed to 2033, right? Yeah. So they've really stepped up. So when I went back to him, his comment was, we feel like we've been good partners with you, and we really think it's time for you guys to step up and show us what you can do. I mean, he even made the comment, do you need the parsonage? So if we sold it, it would go to pay down the mortgage, but he's not going to give us something for it. Now, what I can tell you is if we have this pledge program and we continue to pay it down, we're going to be at a position where we can go to any lender, okay? That's when we go back to them and say, okay, we're going to go somewhere else, okay? Now, what I failed to mention also was the other thing that they put into our documents when we negotiated back in 19 is if we do pay them off by going to another lender, we have a 1% prepayment penalty, right, Cynthia? 1% prepayment. Was that from 19 to 29, or is that from 13 to 23? I think it's 19 to 29. Yeah. So I think besides going from a fixed rate to an adjustable rate, they get a prepayment penalty. Well, if we're down to $2.5 million and we have to pay them $25,000 to get a better rate, that's just part of the cost of doing business. At that point, we can then go back to them and say, if you want to keep our loan before we go to MIF or someplace else, cut us a better deal. And after we've proven how much we've done, that's when we're going to have the leverage on our side as opposed to right now. Cynthia?
There's a question from Fairfax that, is there a way to make us more attractive to Thrivent, more policyholders, or a way to leverage?
I don't know if they heard you online, but the question is there a way for us to let Thrivent know how many parishioners of Lord of Life are members of Thrivent and would really know? That's an interesting question that we would probably have to collect that information here. I mean, I could ask Thrivent, but I don't know if that's confidential. You know, if I was a banker, I wouldn't be able to give that out. So we'd have to kind of find out voluntarily how many people have some sort of insurance policy, banking policy, invested in one of their funds. I know Melissa and I have life insurance through them. Pardon me? No, they have the information, but because of confidentiality, they're not going to tell anybody except the person who has the policy. I don't think they'll tell us that. They might be able to give us a number, but we can find that out. Okay?
First, I want to say that having served with you and listened to this, your optimism is amazing. It's through, and we can hear it. So I think that was a wonderful presentation. And what's going to happen next week is fantastic because I think there's a lot of anxiety around these issues, and you've created something that sounds, as you said, very manageable and reasonable. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Hold on one second, please.
I just had one little question to ask the banker, which is with regard to the last column where you talk about the possibility of refinancing into like a 20 or 25-year term and setting our monthly payment down to such a reasonable level. It seems like, I just wondered in these situations, is there an option for something that's 10-year refinance? You know, it seems like if we've gotten that far, like you said, pay it off in total, but why take us down to such a low monthly payment rather than keeping it steady at the 27 or whatever we've been able to achieve? Is there some other alternative? Is it really 5 or 25?
I understand the question is if we go through this capital campaign and get the mortgage down to 2.5 million, do we have to take a 25-year mortgage, or why couldn't we just do a 10-year mortgage or something like that? The answer is all that's on the table. What the simple math that I did was, if you're looking at what you can afford, okay, I can afford to make my payments of $196,000 a year, and interest rate is 5%, then I can pay it off over 20 years. If I change 20 years to 10%, then the $16,000 or the $196,000 a year becomes a much bigger number. So the question at that point in time is, when we get it paid down to $2.5 million, is what does our operating budget look like? What's our appetite for a capital campaign? What are the interest rates and what terms are available? And then we go out and we cut the best deal. It's always best for us to get down to as low as number as we want. And then if you really want to get positive and put on your sunny hat and take a look at it, you get on $2.5 million, you might say, well, gee whiz, why don't we borrow $3.5 million and do some repairs or put in an elevator in a basement and all that type of stuff. So you know, the future is what we make it. Variables. A lot of variables to work in the future. But all we can do right now is what we can do right now. And that is to have a capital campaign, not sell the parsonage, in my humble opinion, that's a congregational vote, punt that down the road a couple of years, and then let's go from there. Question? One second.
I'm the eternal optimist, as you all know, but I'm sitting here thinking about things like new members, which I now have had responsibility for about all of 3 months. And like you, I read about what's going on in the church in America, the church worldwide. And so I'm thinking about that word assume, never do that, makes a you-know-what out of you and me. I'm assuming that this is based on where we're at right now and the assumption that we're going to be able, with the current membership level, to support this. And I hope and pray, like nobody's business, that that is in fact the case. But I also have a fear and an understanding of the fact that our membership declines. It's not growing. And so how does that reflect, or how is that reflected in this plan? I've written 2 business plans and gone into business twice for myself, both with limited or no success. And I know that making assumptions can be a very dicey thing. Thanks.
I 100% agree that assumptions can be dicey things. But the way I look at it is, again, we can only deal with the card we have in front of us and come up with a plan. And this is the plan that the Resource Advisory Committee thought was the best thing. All those other options, if you can flip back to the option chart up there, all those options up there are still available to us if the plan doesn't work. None of which we really want to do, okay? And we can do member loans, or we could possibly refinance. I mean, we could possibly refinance, let's say, interest rates drop next year, and that we refinance. We could do it then. But right now, you could, I mean, the alternative is to do nothing, and that makes no sense to me. So I think we have to have a plan, which just gives us, we execute the plan, and we got to have some faith, just like that steeple story I told, that's all going to work out. That's all we can do. Question?
I want to go back to that one slide that says, look, we're looking for a new lead pastor.
Oh, the slide about the last, this one right here, resolving issues.
Right, so the way to close some of that gap, that fear, is, as we've been talking, we need to have a plan that the candidate sees as a favorable, as something favorable. This is a huge item. And I think we get the right candidate who sees this opportunity coming out of COVID. I mean, we're looking ahead. We're not looking behind. And we've done well. We've been consistent, but now is the time to look forward, to renew, new pastor. No plan survives contact, but with a plan, that pastor can and probably help push us further along to develop the plan, to continue to evolve it. But we have, like Doug had said, we do have choices that we can make, but we need to have a good, firm plan. And I would support this one. Thanks.
One comment I would add to this whole discussion is that right now, Lord of Life should be looking at itself as a mission congregation. We're coming out of COVID. It has had a big impact on us. If any of you have any been a part of a mission congregation? Yeah. Okay, you know what it's like. It's all hands on deck. And it means that, it's not we're waiting for somebody else to do it. I mean, it's just like we're talking about how can we get back to in-person services at 2 campuses. Well, folks, it's going to take communion assistants, ushers, assisting ministers, you name it, every, technology. That's what it takes to get that done. But if you have two in-person services, I can almost guarantee that attendance is going to go up because people have preferences where they go. So please consider this. Be part of Team Jesus. That's what we heard about today. Think of this as a mission congregation and what you would do to invite more people to be part of it, whether they've been here before and they've kind of slipped away, or other people you know. That's the message I would bring.
Thank you, Mike. Craig? Hold on, I'm going to walk back here.
Where it showed what was the campaign and how much funds were committed. Which one? Yeah. I mean, again, I think it is, I guess the concern is it's very optimistic about the 1.2 million in 4 years. It's $300,000 a year. We also, just for the operating budget, we need $165,000 more than what in envelope offerings that we had for this past year. And I guess, again, in terms of living our legacy, we had, our goal was 1.6. So far, we've received half of that in 3 years. So again, I guess, again, the concern is it's overly conservative that we'll be able to raise the 1.2 million in 4 years.
Thanks, Craig. I think everybody heard that. The question is, are we being overly optimistic if we've raised 740? Did we get pledges? Is Cynthia still here? Did we collect this 740 of gifts collected from Living Our Legacy? Did we get gifts on top of that where people had not made pledges? So that's all the money collected. Okay. So we're over 3 years, 740 versus, it's what's that divided by 3? It's not 300,000 a year. 246, right. The actual mortgage, who can do the math? 740, so it's 246. And I think the gap on the mortgage is 265, so we don't have to collect 300. But the question is, can we raise pledges of 246 to 265 to 300 over a 4-year period? Well, we won't know until we have the capital campaign. We've had shortages in operating budgets, and people stood up at the end of the year, and we seem to have solved those. Any sort of growth at all, or going back to 2 services, hopefully we'll cover that gap. But we're not going to know until we actually have the campaign where we stand. And I'm not sure how Mike is planning on making those when those pledges start, but we'll have to take a look at that. I mean, if we get a capital campaign and we have it in February to March, so we're going to know what that's going to be. And if we only raise $400,000, we're going to be sitting in this room again saying, what's our alternatives? But right now, this is a plan I think we can do if we all want to do it.
One thing that's different here, and like Michelle said, I commend Doug for laying this out for us, is that a lot of times in a capital campaign, you say, this is how much money we have to raise. And the congregation either does or doesn't. And they weigh all their personal responsibilities and their goals and their optimism and pessimism or whatever it is. But the way you've laid it out is that you can tell the congregation that this is what we think we can do. Now, if we don't do that, here's what we will need to do. For example, sell the parsonage, rent one campus, sell one campus. So you give people the opportunity to say, look, you make your choice. What do you want the congregation to aim towards? And I think that's a much more powerful way to present it to the congregation so that they understand these are the choices that we will face if we don't do what we're planning to do. So thank you for laying that out.
You're welcome. Okay. Anybody else have any? Yes. Stop. Sorry. I know, but people can't hear you.
A lot of numbers. Can you explain again how you cover the 1.2 million balloon payment? Is that out of the 296 every year?
The mortgage payment of a balance of 4.6 should include that in there. That's the balance. So I believe the balloon payment's included in the 4.6. That's already in there. Okay? Yeah, when we go to refinance at 2.5, that includes all debt we owe on it, outstanding balloon, everything. And I'll double check those numbers over the next week. Okay? Well, I mean, nobody knows where interest rates are going to go. I mean, yeah, but I mean, again, I mean, nobody thought interest rates, I mean, every economist that I had heard over the last year being in banking, nobody thought the Fed was going to raise rates like this in this year. Everything I hear now is that they're probably going to raise them a little bit, and then they're going to start coming down again. So hopefully, God willing, in spring of 24, it'll be slightly less, so our adjustment with Thrivent doesn't go up, and hopefully in 3 or 4 years, we'll have paid it down enough that the interest rate is low enough that we could go out and refinance. And nothing says that we have to wait $300,000 a year for 4 years. I mean, if interest rates plunge or whatever else, and we see an opportunity to get a longer term loan at $3 million instead of 2.5, and it fits within our budget, we can do that. So this is a plan, and just like any budget that we have for our own personal household, we're going to have to adopt to changing circumstances. But as Jim said, you know, this is a plan to solve the elephant in the room right now, and it's the better alternative than the other ones I threw up on the board, and we have a choice to make, is what Jim was saying. Yes, Craig? Hold on a sec, Mike's going to address that. Well, Mike, the new campaign title versus the old one?
Okay. Renewing our legacy is an umbrella that covers both. Okay. I think part of the problem we've had is people did not understand that the mortgage was not part of the regular budget. So what we're going to do this year, we're going to have 2 lines. One's for the general operating budget, which will include mortgage interest, but then there's a second line for mortgage principal pay down, okay? And if you want to choose to put all your money in this year for mortgage pay down, fantastic. But if you're willing to commit over a longer period, 2, 3, 4 years, whatever, so much the better. We'll give you that choice. But it's important that people understand this is not like your home mortgage where, you know, when you make a payment to the bank for your home mortgage, it covers principal and interest. That's not the way we account for it here. So we've got to let everybody know both are important, both are essential, and hopefully we'll get there. And, you know, I did an analysis 2, 3 years ago, and I took the demographics of Lord of Life for both areas. You know, I got a listing of zip code areas where people lived, broke it down by age group even, and then I just took the tax or the census data for the average income for that age group, for that zip code. And when I calculated it out, it meant that we were getting, contributions were averaging somewhere between 2 and 2.5% of income, okay? If we could raise that average to 3.5%, we'd pay off this entire mortgage in 4 years, okay? I understand cost of living here is higher than a lot of areas, but part of what we're talking about here is our commitment, our dedication to ministry. And that's another thing that a future pastor is going to look at. What is our dedication to making this ministry happen? And that includes time and talent. It also includes finances.
One comment you made, I'd like to make a plea on. When you get your Pledge Pro card there for this upcoming year, if you've got, our annual giving in the mortgage payment, please think about your mortgage payment as over and above your annual giving. If you take all your annual giving and put it in the mortgage payment, we're going to be way behind on that. So keep your pledges to the operating account where they are or higher, inflation 6%, just throw 6% on there. And then what you can put towards a mortgage, add that down there. So that's my only other ask. Any other questions before we finish? Pastor, would you like to end us with any comments, thoughts, and a prayer?
Yes.
Thank you.
First of all, a shout out, and then a silly answer to your question, and then a benediction. The shout out is you have now seen the kind of wonderful people that we have as congregational leaders. Both Doug and Mike, and then previously Alex and Cynthia, and all the people who work with them are part of Team Jesus. There's another little shout out that I would want to say is that this year I asked if the preschools could put their financial report into the annual report, and the directors were very happy to comply. And on their own, they said, and we'd be happy to come to this meeting if we're needed to answer questions. And so I'm going to shout out to the two of you, Ashley Sayan and Julia Gardner here. Raise your hands. Thank you for your work. Then a silly answer to your question. You don't like the title RATS for the Resource Advisory Team. So I'm going to propose Mortgage Improvement Committee Extraordinaire. And the acronym is MICE. All in favor say aye. Okay? There, from rats to mice. I don't know if that was an improvement. We're getting better, he says. Okay, let's stand and pray. Loving God, I thank you very much for those who care so much about your church and your ministry, that they have spent time here talking about things that are necessary, although not always that exciting. Yet allow us to be enthused and illuminated and motivated to move forward so that we can indeed be Team Jesus here at Lord of Life as we are part of Team Jesus across the globe. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.